Okay, today we're gonna be looking at the new economic policy and matriculation in Malaysia. Oh yeah. Now, as you know, Mahathir Mohamad spoke not too long ago, with regards to the matriculation system in Malaysia being a backdoor for Malays to go into tertiary education.
So now we have agreed that we will give also to the non-Malays. So the whole idea of trying to increase the Malay students in the universities by matriculation is nullified because even Chinese and Indian students also go through the back door.
Now, there's something really wrong with the way and fair enough, like I totally understand that, if it's a program that's exclusively done for people who cannot help themselves, then it doesn't make sense for other people to come in. But the question for me is, how are you funding these programs? Is it being paid by the taxpayers of every single other races, or is it just taken out from the income from Malay people? It's a bit unfair for you to suddenly say that, let's take taxpayers' money from across all races to fund this specifically thing for Bumis, or national people in Malaysia. So, but there's a whole lot of people complaining about the matriculation quota is being unfair, and of course it's unfair, like, because all these ideas with affirmative actions or handouts given to people will always make people less hardworking. Imagine if you were to enter the Olympics and you're running a 100-meter race, and then instead of competing with everyone else and competing each other and becoming better and better, you're just basically making your own race. So that seems to be unfair to me. But before we move on to this whole bit, let's see what Malaysia's new economic policy is about anyway. It started in the 1970s as part of a package of measures introduced after the political crisis of May 1969. It's like a weird racial civil war there that happened in Malaysia. It sought to eradicate poverty, that's number one, and restructure society to eliminate the identification of race with economic function in order to create the conditions of national unity. Since then, poverty in Malaysia has gone down tremendously, as in the neighboring Thailand and Indonesia, which somehow did not have a comparable commitment to poverty reduction, but still experienced rapid economic growth and structural transformations. That's another interesting question, because how well has this program worked in Malaysia, I guess, is the question, right? The statistics. And it has worked well. This is a paper from Donald R. Snodgrass. So basically he says, poverty eradication was clear-cut, impressive success. Nearly half of all households in Peninsular Malaysia lived in poverty in 1970. That is ridiculously high. And that went down to 17.1%. The official figure for Malaysia as a whole in 1990 was 17.1%. And that's really close to the target of 16.7%. So I like these ideas that when you carry out a policy, and then the aim is, you have an aim and you have something to measure it with, to compare it with. The other thing besides poverty eradication is employment restructuring, right? And in this employment restructuring, I think it was something like, or the Bumis were having 2.4% of the whole wealth of the nation. And this, mind you, we're talking about majority of this 2.4% is the 65% of Malays in Malaysia. I think the idea was we want to increase this 2.4% to 30%. We want to reduce the, I have another piece here that I got, the non-Bumiputra from 32% to 40%. And I think to get the ownership of foreign ownership from 63% down to whatever it is that we can. I think 30% or something like that. And I think we've achieved this. You can find the links below. So we have a lot of money that's being put out. Education Ministry have received $41.3 billion back in 2016, and in 2019 now we've bumped it up to $60.2 billion ringgit. So that's like almost 20% of the entire budget for this year, right? So it's no wonder that Mazli, the Minister of Finance in Malaysia, is saying, well, it's to make a bigger matriculation intake, so bigger cut for everyone. But the problem here is, the retention of the 90% Bumi Putra quota amid the expansion of matriculation programs to 40,000 students intake is a win-win situation. So they increased it from 25,000 places to 40,000 places. But at the same time, it's still the relative number of 90% is still pretty high for the Bumis. And the question is, well, amongst all these plans that is being put forth, I still do not see a clear-cut, transparent plan that's needed.
Action policies to reasonable statistical evaluation, given a sufficient period.
Well, what is a sufficient? Because you said for a bit, and now we talk about a sufficient period, and I have difficulty with these. What temporal units are we talking about?
I would say
centuries, decades.
I would think of.
So the length, I think, of these programs is very, very important, because then you can say for a fact, okay, let's aim for, and I think 20 to 25 years is really too short. I mean, you cannot change the mentality of the people pre-colonization to, somewhat of a modern, postmodern lifestyle within one generation. You need at least maybe 3 generations maybe, so let's give it a century perhaps, I'm not too sure. But this is basically the problem, right? The problem is about the length. How can you tell how long these things take? And yet people still complain. Here is a news on Malay Mail: matriculation no longer relevant, show proof, UMNO VIP tells Daim. So I think Tun Daim Zainuddin basically challenged and said that we should eradicate. Has challenged Tun UMNO Vice President Datuk Seri Muhammad Khalid Nordin challenged Tun Daim Zainuddin to prove his assertion that the matriculation system is irrelevant today, as the racial imbalances in the education have been corrected. You see, the burden of proof should not be on the people who are against the policy. It's actually the burden of proof should be on the people who make the policies themselves. Like, what is the evidence for it? Where is the case study? Where's the generational study? Who is carrying out these studies? Why am I not seeing these studies anywhere with regards to how are you, you make a very important policy in Malaysia, and you have to really measure that and follow up on it really, really intensively and really in detail.
No, but it's fascinating that I see this happening in all sorts of issues, from Federal Reserve policies on across the board, that you say, here's this wonderful program, and it will do wonderful things, and the burden of proof is on others to show that it will not do those things. And no matter how long it's been going on,
it's not long enough.
It's never long enough. If it failed, there just wasn't enough commitment. The budget wasn't big enough, should have had a larger staff, wider powers, but there is never any sense of a burden of proof on you to say, when you've made this change that has caused such furor in this country and has gotten people at each other's throats, including people who have been allies in the past, such as blacks and the Jews, there is never any sense of a need for you to advance the empirical evidence to support what you've been doing.
So, the burden of proof, let me tell you what the burden of proof is. Well, I was trying to read for this a little bit, and it's quite difficult. Here's a paper from, Lessons from Post-Colonial Malaysian Economic Development from Jomo KS and Wee Chong Hui. So we're looking at policy lessons that we can learn from this, chapter 5. The very different economic policies pursued over the last half-century, as well as the often crucial role of exogenous circumstances, make an evaluation of the Malaysian economic development strategy very complicated. It is quite difficult for you to measure these things, especially when economics comes into play. It's not an easy thing to look at. Rather, more sophisticated, consistent and pragmatic investment and technology policies would probably need to be sustained for some time to pave the conditions for a new phase of economic development cognizant of existing problems and weaknesses, as well as strength and potential. Unfortunately, the continuing preoccupation with the inter-ethnic distributional issues and the continuing ideological denial of the role of the industrial policy in Malaysia economic development may take an uninformed public debate in Malaysia over such a development policy is difficult. It takes some time, right? Needs to be sustained for some time. The question is how long? It's a very difficult question to answer. Being in denial of the idea that your policies are not working should not be a policy of Malaysia. But has it always been this case? Back in the 1970s, when all these things first came out, prior to 1990, so between 1970s and 1990, there was very specific, transparent policies that's been taken out. And the two things that we talked about, the poverty eradication, going from 49.3% to a whopping 3.8%. I don't know what 3.8% is. It's something like that, right? It's going down to 4%. And of course, the employment restructuring is also coming about. So the question is, is this affirmative action policy even making sense at all?
70s.
No, it's been the contrast between well-off
that
people and badly off people. And that's true in other countries as well, that in Malaysia, where they've had affirmative action for the same amount of time, it's had the same results. It has done nothing for the poor Malays. The lowest level of Malays receive a smaller percentage of all the income received by Malays today than before this program was put into effect, as is true of blacks in the United States.
Is it worthless to...
And he's not wrong. Let's look at this values that we look. This is another paper that I've been reading. Malaysia's new economic policy, growth and distribution, revisiting the debate, right? And they have nicely put out this table, statistics of numbers of the disparity ratios and the differences between the racial average income ratios and things like that. Now you can see 1970s when the first NEP, the policies came out, to 1985, you see a Chinese to Malay average income ratio dropping from 2.29 to 1.76, and an Indian to Malay average ratio is 1.76 to 1.28. See, it's sort of working. So this is the evidence that Daim was talking of, possibly, right? It's going down to until 1985. But the thing is, ever since 1987 to 1997, something else is happening, right? You see a disparity between not just the Chinese to Bumiputras or Indians to Bumiputras anymore, but also, well, we see that, right? Those numbers are hovering between there. It's actually even increasing towards 1997. Even for the Indians and Bumis, it's actually increasing again to 1997. Now, mind you that 1998 is the or is it 97 is the economic crisis, right? So there's a lot of implications on that. But what's more important here is that the urban to rural disparity ratios are also increasing. So that means that within even the Malay community, the poorest ethnic community in Malaysia, there are also urban Malays and also poor Malays or rural Malays. And the disparities between them are changing. So the people who are well off families get more, and the people who are not well off in the Malay communities also get less and less. So the polarization is even larger. So to carry out an affirmative action just based upon group identity, like race, for example, it might be a bad idea. No wonder there's a case for Malay envy, right? The envy of people of other communities feel towards the Malays, the envy of Malays feeling towards other communities, and the Malay envy within their own community. Now, I'm a bit on the fence on this, because I too am a proponent of Malaysia economic policy. I appreciate completely the opportunities that was given to me to study abroad and collect all these ideas and become who I am today. But nevertheless, I have to admit that along the way, I have seen numerous people, Malays for example, who take it very lightly. They think like it's as if, you're using taxpayers' money to fund your lifestyle outside of Malaysia, to expand your horizon, to learn new cultures, and yet what you do is fail. Use the money to fund other things like forex, or support costs of marriage of your family members, to a point where suddenly you fail. You fail your programs, you fail your, the responsibility that you have, right? You cannot just enjoy the freedom of having that funding that's being presented to you by other Malaysians and expect no responsibility whatsoever. You have to uphold being the representative of Malaysia in order to further develop the Malaysian status.
Among his plans in reforming the education system is to abolish exams for pupils in years 1 to 3 in 2019.
It's about shifting away teachers and students and parents from this exam-oriented culture. We want the students to enjoy the learning process more than the rotting and preparation for examination, because a lot more to learn, a lot more we need to equip our children with a lot of skills rather than, preparing them only to sit for certain examination.
I think Mazli has a good idea of how these things work. And I trust that he has the nation's interests at heart. But at the same time, I urge him and the people in Malaysia to do a detailed study and a clear, transparent plan to say, well, this is the new plan. Let's take this for the next 50 years and make sure, I don't know, every 5 years, every 2 years or so, have a progress report of all these things. We don't see that enough. Let's put our faith back into the system. Let's try to be more transparent. For the Chinese and Indians, do understand that we still need more time. I guess the Malays need more time. It's just, you can't just change everything within one generation. Give it another 2 maybe. But on the other hand, I completely feel and understand for the Malays that you should be very transparent about things, and also do not take things for granted. I think this is one of the biggest issue that's also causing this envy. If you're putting your nation's best, and they deserve it, and they've changed their lives and come back and serve and further develop Malaysia's case, then everything will be fine. But unfortunately, there are people who are just even abusing these systems, and that's wrong. If you yourself are a recipient of this matriculation program or any other higher education scholarships that's being put out from Malaysia, and you feel that what I'm saying is correct or not, leave a comment down below. And if you haven't hit subscribe button and the notification bell, then you would know more about what's actually happening in Malaysia, I guess. And that's about it. Peace.